Now, each task that we entered in here is going to require some sort of resource to complete the task. Resources, as I mentioned in my first training video, could include workers or work resources, materials, and costs. Well, I want to explain it to you a bit more in detail here. I'm going to open up my PowerPoint presentation. Not only do you have your typical three resources, which is your work, materials, and costs, but we have a fourth resource type, and that's budget. And I'm going to go in detail over each one of these here. First, let's talk about the work resources. There's two types of work resources. The most obvious one are the people that will be working on the task. That's your resource, your laborers, your writers, your editors. And then we have our equipment resources, something that we can use over and over again. Not only on a task or another task, but on a completely different project, like a forklift, maybe a paintbrush if we rinse it out, or a hammer. Now you could say that the hammer and the forklift could be a material resource, but material resources are basically consumable items. So the definition would be supplies or consumable items used to complete a task. So in other words, once we're done with the task, like writing our book, we will have used up quite a bit of paper. Also some ink, and well, if we were building a home, we'd use up this lumber here. So consumable items will be your material resources when it's used up when you finish completing a task. The third type of resource are your cost resources. They're basically miscellaneous or indirect expenses that will vary from task to task and don't change by the amount of work performed. And they include airfare, lodging, meals, things that don't really have a direct impact. But you still want to keep track of the expenses because they're part of the project. And then finally we have what's called a budget resource. And basically it's the maximum amount of money set aside or budgeted for each resource type. So we've got a set budget for our work. We've got a set budget for the materials, a set budget for the costs. And like I said, those are the four types of resources. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and escape out of the PowerPoint presentation, go back to my project, and let's get out of this view to our resource sheet view where we can enter in all our resources. Now to change views, you can do it one of a couple of ways. You can either come up here and click on the View menu and go down and change views by selecting another view. Right now you can see Gantt charts checked. If I go to Resource Sheet, it'll take me right there. Or you can come down here and click on the View bar and it pops open the bar to the left-hand side, which gives you all these different views that you can quickly click on just by moving your mouse over here. Not only that, but if you right-click on the View bar, you can also choose from a list here. In other words, this View bar, let me click off in a blank area, has quite a few views, right? And you can scroll down a bit by clicking on the drop-down arrow or up. But instead of moving your mouse down or up, I can just right-click and not have to go too far to go to my resource sheet view. Also, I can uncheck the view bar and have it collapsed, or I can go ahead and right-click on the view bar and say View the View bar, or not even open it up and just go right to my resource sheet. Now, anytime you're in a new view, you want to ask yourself two questions, and I'm going to pound this home because I did cover it in a previous training video. But some of the confusion comes in is when you go to a new view, is what view am I in and what table am I in? Well, this is the resource sheet view, but I'm in the entry table. How do I know? Well, if I click on the View menu and I go down to Table, it says Entry, and you can see it's checked over here. Because I'm in the resource sheet view and it's checked, I could be in a different table within that view, which could be the cost view. So keep that in mind so you know where you're at all times, those two questions. What view am I in and what table am I in? And you can verify that again through the View menu. Now, I know there's a lot of columns here in the resource sheet. We're going to keep it really simple to introduce you to the resource sheet. We're going to enter in all the resources names like our editors, project managers, publishers, the materials like glossy paper. Then we'll enter in the type of resource, whether it's work, material, or cost. Remember, we have the three types of resources, and we'll talk about the additional fourth one, the budget resource, later. And then material labels, like if we have paper, we could give it a label as in reams of paper. And then finally, we'll cover the group here in this training video, which means, are the resources internal or are they coming externally? In other words, if we outsource this to somebody else, are we hiring on an editor or contracting somebody in to be our resource to help complete the task, which when finished will complete the project? So let's start with the first resource name. We'll type it in. We'll say it's Writer 1. Now you can have, if you've got the person's name, you can say it's Bob, he's the writer, Susie, she's a writer. But to keep it simple, I'm just going to call them Writer 1, 2, and 3. Then when I'm finished, I'll hit the Tab key. Now by default, Microsoft is going to fill in a lot of fields for us. One of the defaults is the type of resource it is, it's work. You can click on the drop-down arrow and you have the two other different types. Now wait a minute, I thought Kurt said that there was 4 different types of resources. Well, we got our work, material, cost. What about budget? Budget isn't listed here. Basically for budget, you'll select cost and then you'll have to check a little box to define that the cost is going to be the cost for your budget or your budget cost. We'll cover that in just a minute here. So the writer is a work resource. It's not material. I'm not going to, use him up as a consumable item on a task. And then over here for the group, you can do whatever you want when it comes to group. I'm keeping it simple. This writer is employed by us, so I'm going to put him in the internal group and hit enter. And for right now, that's what we're going to focus on. In a later training video, I'll cover over the rest of the columns here, like the max units and the standard rate, cost used, and so on. So the next resource, I'm just going to go ahead and finish typing in quite a few here. Work, and it's internal. I'm just going to zip down here. That's fine. Now, as I said before, Microsoft Project has a bunch of cells. It looks just like an Excel spreadsheet. There's some features and things that when you do in Excel will also apply here in Project. For example, instead of coming in here and typing in internal for all these resources here, I can come up here and select the first one, and this is something you would learn in one of my Excel training videos, is using the autofill handle. When you hover over the lower right hand corner and your pointer turns into a black cross, you then can go ahead and click on that black cross and drag it down, and it will automatically fill in the same information that you clicked and dragged from into the cell sequentially as you drag down below. So there I don't have to type it in over and over again. Let me go ahead and now my travel expenses are going to be cost, because there's no real way to tie it to a task as you would like with work, a worker actually working on the task, or consumable material that I can actually say when the task is completed we used 50 sheets of paper. Now here's my glossy paper. That's going to be material that we can consume in a task or a couple of tasks, so I'll click on the drop down arrow and say material, or you can type in the letter, the first letter, C for cost, and let me backspace M for material, then hit your tab key. Now the material label here, I'm going to have it as reams. So every time I assign glossy paper to a task, it's going to be in reams. 1 ream, 2 reams, how many sheets of paper in a ream? Like 500? In any case, that's what it means to me here. And you'll see later on how that's going to apply when we start assigning our resources to our task. Now every ream of paper that we use is going to be some sort of cost attached to it. So later on, when we start assigning our resources like our glossy paper to a task, we can assign 1, 2, 3, or 4 reams. And each ream, maybe it'll be $2 or $3 a ream. In any case, I'll finish this up. Now next, remember our fourth resource type? It's not listed here, which is work, material, and cost, but budget. So for example, I've got a budget for all my cost resources. I have a budget for all my work resources. So all these workers here, let's say the total budget for them is $5,000. To enter my budget or the limit for my different types of resources here, my work, cost, material, I'm going to come down here and type it like so. You don't have to type it this way. You can type it any way you want or spell it out, whatever makes sense to you, that this is going to be your budget resource for your costs or miscellaneous. And this is going to be tied to our costs, okay? Now I'm not done yet. Let me finish typing in the rest of my budgets for labor, which will be work. That works out good. And then my budget for my material resource. And I'll click on the drop down arrow and say your material. Okay, so right now, Project does not see the difference between my budgets and my other resources here. To make that difference, to make that change, I have to come up here and let's start with our first our budget miscellaneous, or budget for our cost resources. Just double click on it really fast to bring up the dialog box here. And up here on the General tab, there's a little teeny tiny box over here that when you check it, it'll change this resource from a standard resource that Project thinks is just another cost resource into an actual budget that later on I'll show you where you can go ahead and type in the money. And for this resource, it's going to be the total amount of money that you can spend or that you're allowed to spend on all the other cost resources. Go ahead and click OK. And of course we'll need to convert these to the budget resources by double clicking on it. General tab, checking the budget box here, clicking OK. And of course our materials, checking the budget box and clicking OK. So now, Project sees these resources up here that I have selected as typical resources that I can assign to the project for work, cost, and materials. Just by simply typing in the budget label down here doesn't make it a budget resource until I actually double click and again check that budget box. So I have a budget for my cost now, my work, and my materials. And like I said, later on, we're going to go ahead and assign the actual cost. Like a writer, we may charge $50 an hour, so I'll go ahead and put it over in the standard rate per hour. And also our editor, and then we'll have a set budget that we'll enter in for the cost, work, and materials. Thanks for watching. Hey, as a quick reminder, if you like my video, please give it a thumbs up. You can also click on me and subscribe to my channel, get notified of the latest videos, and for only $2 a month, you can have access to all my Microsoft Office training videos.